something that you and I discussed a couple of weeks ago, and I think I'm going to be proved right. Remember, I told you the Thursday before the Friday that OPEC met, that there was a likelihood Saudi Arabia would increase production, and we went back to the Trump visit to Saudi Arabia and wore that stupid shirt, and looked kind of like a gangster or something.
But he received a very warm welcome.
Very warm welcome. And then, he probably said, we need you to produce more oil in the way Trump says producing more oil. Anyway, OPEC agreed to do that, and there's been kind of a fight. The speculators, the people that have bet long on oil, are doing all they can, in my humble opinion, to mislead the public. Not accusing them of lying, but they've got a financial interest in oil staying at an appreciated price. And I'm beginning to see some of the consequence of propping up a market for a couple of weeks too long. I think when Saudi Arabia made the announcement, and I think between Saudi Arabia and a couple of other OPEC countries, it's about 1 million barrels a day, somewhere thereabout. If you've noticed at the pump, gas has declined a little bit in the middle of driving season, and I think you're going to see that further. I think I predicted gas being $1.89 by the fall or winter of the year. I stand by that prediction. Mm-hmm. I still think gas, let's say $2 a gallon, somewhere thereabout. It was $2.55. I've got this particular station I pay attention to because I pass it every day, and I remember leaving the radio station that day, and I drove by, and it was $2.55. This morning it was $2.43. So that's a 12. But
it seemed like it, because this announcement, like you said, was a few weeks ago.
About 3 weeks ago.
And it's the 1 million barrel production, additional production. And I've been waiting for the prices to plummet, and they haven't.
Well, they haven't.
It's been slow.
They haven't because the speculators have put up some faux resistance.
And this is the artificial propping you're talking about?
That's what I argue. Now, and look, I'm not an oil trader. I'm not a speculator. Those guys are bright people, probably some of the brightest people in America. They know how to play those numbers and shenanigans. And yes, some of it is shenanigans, but having been in the convenience store business and making money or not on the purchase of fuel, the purchase of a couple of tankers of gas, I'm somewhat familiar with how that world works. And I'm arguing that they propped it up for as long as they could. They held staff, and that's probably what they tried to do was dilute some of those long positions as much as they could. And I think you're beginning to see some of the decline that I was talking about. Anything can happen. I mean, something geopolitically could happen tomorrow, and shake the world or spook the world. I think some of the Venezuelan oil is making its way to the market. But I read something in Bloomberg that the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, sees U.S. crude output averaging about 12 million barrels a day in 2019. Why is that a big number? We're doing about 10 points, about between 10.9 and 11.2 right now. So we're going to add about 800,000 barrels per day to the market. Now, the margins in the market are somewhere around 600,000 barrels a day. In other words, we're producing about 600,000 barrels more. Now, that doesn't mean every week's like every week. I mean, the Chinese economy, we talked about how much concrete they've used. Well, that's diesel trucks and Caterpillars and, all these heavy equipment that burn diesel fuel. That's still a byproduct of oil. But that would make the United States, if we get to 11.8 million barrels a day, that would officially make us the world's leading producer of crude oil. And that's why it's substantial. And I think Saudi Arabia sees this. And I think Saudi Arabia, some of the articles I'm reading in Bloomberg, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal had an article very interesting to me. OPEC pumped about 10.5 million barrels a day last month as, I guess you refer to the kingdom. It's a cartel, for lack of a better word. They're trying to cap. They were trying, and I think it was a U.S. request. They were trying to cap these rallying requests because the oil rally, while it makes speculators a lot of money and oil companies a lot of money, it's detrimental to the economy. And there's some issues within the global economy, Europe in particular, that I think the EIA and some other people got involved in. But yeah, if we start producing 12 million barrels a day, we will be the largest producer of crude oil in the world.
And does that have ramifications?
Well, here's what I don't understand. I mean, if we're producing 12 million, 11.8 billion. So let's call it 12 million for argument's sake. And I don't know the answer to this, and I'd like to try to find out. If we're producing 12 million barrels of oil a day, how much do we consume? I mean, obviously there's a formula for the conversion of crude oil to gasoline or crude oil to diesel fuel. The misnomer and the miscalculation, and what a lot of people don't understand, because I've had people reference me, about the price of gas, price of oil. That's not all. I mean, that's the primary driver of price, but you've got a housing sector. What are in shingles? There's a lot of correct. There's a lot of the oil residue in shingles. I mean tires, on vehicles. I mean plastics to some degree have crude oil as a byproduct. So when we look at the macro, it is about gas and diesel. I mean it is. There's no question that the overwhelming majority of oil is converted to one form or other of petroleum energy, gas and diesel. But there's still a large share of oil that goes in shingles and tires and plastics and all these other sorts of things. I'm just curious, and I don't know how this works. I mean, this is so far above my pay grade. I mean, I can tell you about miracles and, virgin births and all that stuff. I just can't tell you this oil dynamic. I can't figure it out. I've got all this the crucifixion's piece of cake to me. I've got it figured out. But this
is complex.
Yeah, this oil dynamic is real complex because it involves the pursuit of do-re-mi.
Well, and at some point you talk about energy independence, and I guess there's a scale that would tip toward we don't rely on OPEC.
Well, and there's a lot of commentary about the lack of refining. The United States has not built a refinery, and there's some truth to that. I mean, we are lacking in refineries, but there's a little beauty in that. The companies that own the refineries, they like gas to be fairly expensive. I just don't understand, if we're the leading producer of oil in the world, then can we become independent? Can we become less or non-dependent on OPEC and some of these other countries that are very volatile? Iran, Venezuela, Iraq. I mean, some of these countries who have a lot of oil resources, but they're incredibly unpredictable. They're always volatile. And you've heard the story. The Venezuelan government does something, or they shoot a missile across somewhere, and oil goes up, 4% or 5%. And we're always at the mercy of that. The geopolitic always plays into that.
And as it relates to refineries, let one of our refineries in the United States go offline.
Here we come to hurricane. I mean,
yeah.
Well, it doesn't have to go offline. I mean, you're right. Offline. I thought you meant if they get damaged. No, I mean, if they just have to remove take the people off the platform and take them to safe places because of a hurricane approaching,
prices go up.
You have a big increase in pricing. And it's an unpredictable situation, but it's all about price. And there's a balance. And, from what I understand, to extract shale and this shale phenomenon that, some of the Midwestern and the Dakotas have been a large benefit of, there's about a $50 extraction price. In other words, if oil gets to $42 or $3 or $4, oil becomes cheaper to buy oil from OPEC than it does to fund or support the American economy by the oil that is derived as a result of shale, the shale process. But at 70 or 75 or $80 where it was headed, then, some of the shale or some of the wells shuttered. They can't become profitable. It's just interesting to me. They can become very profitable. It's just interesting to me to watch that dynamic. But what I'm asking, and I wish I knew somebody who could properly answer this because I can't. How much oil does it take to run the American economy? And I understand we live in a global, that's an unfair question because, we always connected and we got plants and American companies have plants in this and that and the other. So if you look at, if you looked at Caterpillar's balance sheet and so much, diesel and gas they used, it wouldn't properly reflect on them being an American company because a lot of their manufacturing facilities are in places all around. It's just real complex. Mm-hmm. I still stand by my point that I believe sooner than later, sometime fall, early winter, I think gas will be back to $2 a gallon. And I think a lot of it has to do with, once again, a very aggressive producing element within the United States And I think the majority of that, I mean, I'm not giving Trump all the credit here. I didn't call Trump's name today. I'm not giving Trump all the credit here, but I do think the deregulating and the opening of certain places, allowing for oil exploration, will absolutely benefit the American consumer at the pump. So let's, that's just kind of an interesting story. And Bloomberg is the one that wrote it. U.S. is set to become world's largest oil producer. And that is per the Energy Information Administration, 12 million barrels a day. That's pretty crazy that America's producing 12 million barrels of oil a day. I don't know where it ends up. Maybe it stays here. Maybe it doesn't. Doesn't make any sense. We're going to ship oil over there so you can ship it over here. But I would imagine there's some complex reasons that people do that.
Back to do-re-mi, like
bingo.
you say.
You want to find out what's happening? Follow the do-re-mi, and it'll always lead you to what's going on. Back in a minute. Good morning, PD Live 95.